Greetings children, today we are going to learn a new lesson. The name of the lesson is The Landscape of the Soul. It is written by Nathalie Trevorroy, a Belgian art historian. This lesson tells us about a comparative study of Chinese painting and European painting. Let us learn a little bit about the author. Landscape of the Soul. Nathalie Trevorroy. She is an art historian. She has certain connection with India because she is the wife of the Belgian ambassador to India. Nathalie, who has done her master's degree in the history of art and archaeology with a specialization in Japanese art. She is pained at the eroding heritage of Delhi. The problem is that Delhites don't have a sense of belonging. She says and adds, a majority of people staying in Delhi are migrants from pre-partition Punjab or from states like Bihar, southern India. A need to preserve the heritage is missing. That is her opinion about India. And this is her connection with the Indian society. Painting is one of the forms of expression like literature, music and dance. These have an abstract nature as they can't be defined and felt or experienced. All these art forms have an abstract nature. Landscape of the soul. Let us learn a little summary of the story. It deals with a comparative study of European and Chinese paintings. The writer uses two stories to make a contrast. European art is about reproducing an actual view, whereas Chinese art is about creating an imaginative landscape. This is the major difference that she tries to put forward between these two forms of painting, European and Chinese. European art is an artist's way to let viewers show exactly what he wants them to see in the landscape. It is a kind of borrowing the eye of the painter and enjoying the painting. This is the European art. In European painting, the artist's way to let viewers show exactly what he wants them to see in the landscape. It is observed. It is viewed from the viewpoint of the painter. We have to borrow his eyes to make understand the painting. Chinese art is the artist's spiritual and inner voice, where you can travel from any point and it lets the viewer create a path for their imagination. That is the major difference between European art and Chinese art. Chinese art is a spiritual and inner voice of the artist, and the viewer can travel from any point. It lets the viewer create a path of his own with his imagination. It is a sort of borrowing the mind of the painter for enjoying the art. Instead of borrowing the eye of the artist, here in Chinese painting we have to borrow the mind of the artist to enjoy the art. Important areas of discussion in this story. Anecdotes related to Chinese and European painting. Second, Taoism. Taoism is a philosophical tradition of Chinese origin which emphasizes living in harmony with the Tao, or the way or the method. That is Taoism. And the third element is how one of the philosophical doctrines of Taoism called Shan Shui is reflected in Chinese painting. The Chinese philosophical idea of shan shui. How does it reflect in Chinese painting? That is also explained in the text. The author is an expert from Flanders. Flanders is a part in Belgium. She writes about the essential differences between Eastern and Western painting. She tries to convey through this lesson the essential differences one can see between the Eastern and Western paintings. Now come to the lesson, Landscape of the Soul, written by Nathalie Trevroy. Look at the first paragraph. A wonderful old tale is told about the painter Udausi, who lived in the 8th century. His last painting was a landscape commissioned by the Tang Emperor Xuanzong to decorate a palace wall. The master had hidden his work behind a screen, so only the emperor would see it. For a long while, the emperor admired the wonderful scene, discovering forest, high mountains, waterfalls, clouds floating in an immense sky, men on hilly paths, birds in flight. This story tells us about Udausi, a painter, a Chinese painter, and he did his last landscape painting, and it was commissioned by the Tang Emperor Xuanzong, and this painting was done on to decorate the palace wall of Emperor Xuanzong. Actually, this master Udausi made his work behind a screen. He let only the emperor to see it. And when the emperor admired the wonderful scene, he looked every element in the picture, in the painting. Then the master Udausi called the emperor's attention. Look, sire, said the painter, in this cave at the foot of the mountain dwells a spirit. He showed the emperor a little cave at the end of that mountain, and he told him that inside the cave a spirit dwells. The painter clapped his hands. After telling this, the painter clapped his hands, and the entrance to the cave opened. Then what happened was, the entrance to the cave automatically opened before him. The inside is splendid, wonderful inside of the cave, beyond anything words can convey. That is really inexplicable. Wonderful sight. The emperor and Udausi saw it. Please let me show your majesty the way. Then he invited the emperor to enter the cave. He wanted to show him the way to enter the painting. The painter entered the cave, but the entrance closed behind him. But suddenly it happened. As the painter entered the cave, the entrance closed behind him. And before the astonished emperor could move or utter a word, the painting had vanished from the wall. Before he could utter a word, before the emperor could utter a word, the painting had already vanished from the wall. Not a trace of Udausi's brush was felt. Not even a single touch of his brush was left on the wall. And the artist was never seen again in the world. And after this incident, the master painter Wudosi was not seen anywhere in the world. He disappeared with his painting. This is the story. And this story tells us about the Chinese painting, a spirituality, attaining a spirituality when a painting is completed. That is what this story tells us. Such stories played an important part in China's classical education. So many such stories can be found in the classical art forms of China. The books of Confucius and Zhuangzi are full of them, the two Chinese philosophies. In these philosophies, we can see full of such stories. They helped the master to guide his disciple in the right direction. Through such stories, the master guided their disciples in the right direction. Beyond the anecdote, anecdote here means a short account of an incident. They are deeply revealing of the spirit. Look at that. Beyond this anecdote, it deeply reveals the spirit in which art was considered. The spirit in which art was considered. Contrast this story or another famous one about a painter who would not draw the eye of a dragon he had painted for fear it would fly out of the painting. With an old story from my native Flanders that I find most representative of Western painting. The writer wanted to compare or contrast the Chinese story with a story from her own land, Flanders. Flanders is in Belgium. A part of Belgium is Flanders. Or another story from Europe, that is one famous painter who would not draw the eye of a dragon he had painted. The famous painter drew the picture of a dragon, but he did not draw the eye of the dragon, fearing that it would fly away if he would give the dragon its eye. In 15th century Antwerp, a master blacksmith. Antwerp is a city in Belgium. A city in Belgium. A master blacksmith called Kundenmetsis fell in love with a painter's daughter. This story is about Kundenmetsis. He was a blacksmith and he fell in love with a painter's daughter. The father would not accept a son-in-law in such a profession, but the painter was not ready to accept him as his son-in-law because of his menial profession of a blacksmith. So Quinten sneaked into the painter's studio. Sneaked means came secretly into the painter's studio and painted a fly on his latest panel. He had set his panel and ongoing a painting, and he went for something. During that interval, this blacksmith sneaked into his studio and drew the picture of a fly. Look at the picture. With such a delicate realism that master tried to swat it away before he realized what had happened. And he did the work with a delicate realism. Delicate realism here means the alluring quality of the art which makes it seem real. That is delicate realism. He did his work as in such a manner as it seems as a real fly that is sitting on the panel. Then when the painter came there, he tried to swat it away, To sat away means he wanted to drive away the fly from the panel. Then only he realized what had happened there. Quinton was his beloved. Quinton was immediately admitted as an apprentice into his studio. Apprentice means a helper, a learner of a new art, that is called apprentice. So immediately Quinton was appointed as his helper, his apprentice. He married his beloved and went on to become one of the most famous painters of his age. Then he proved himself as a great painter. He married his beloved lady and later became a famous painter. These two stories illustrate what each form of art is trying to achieve. These two stories, the story from China and one from that Belgium, these two stories, one is a representative of Asia and another a representative of Europe, illustrate what each form of art is trying to achieve. So what these two forms of art try to achieve through their painting, European painting and Chinese painting, a perfect illusionistic likeness in Europe. When we consider the European painting, they wanted to create an illusionistic likeness, a perfect illusionistic likeness. Illusionistic likeness here means a pictorial method in order to deceive the eyes. We can't differentiate between what is the original and what is the creation. Such a creation, such an art form is called illusionistic likeness in Europe. So European painting or European art gives emphasis for reality, looks like the real one, the essence of inner life and spirit in Asia. But when we consider the Asian art or Chinese painting, it gives importance to the inner life or the spirit, the spirituality of the art form. That is the major differences between the European art form and the Chinese art form. Come to the next paragraph. In the Chinese story, the emperor commissions a painting and appreciates its outer appearance. The emperor in the Chinese story can enjoy, can appreciate only the outer elements of the painting, the outer appearance. But the artist reveals to him the true meaning of his work. Then the artist tries to reveal what is the real meaning of the painting. The emperor may rule over the territory he has conquered, but only the artist knows the way within. So the writer here says, an emperor can rule sometimes very well the entire territory that he has or that he had conquered, but he can't go into the territory. But an artist knows the way within. He knows the way within of his territory, that is his painting. He knows the way in which how to convey the message in his painting, the ideas in his painting. He knows the ways and methods to go into it, but an emperor can't. Let me show the way. The Tao, a word that means both the path or the method. This is Tao, Taoism in China. Tao here means both a path or method. There is a path, there is a way, and there is a method to understand the painting. that the artist only knows, and the mysterious works of the universe. And here reveal the mysterious works of the universe. Yes, there is a mysterious work behind this universe that can be understood only by the artist, not by the emperors. The mysterious works of the universe. Only an artist can understand the mysteries of the universe. The hidden energies, the hidden mysteries behind this creation that only an artist can understand. That is what the writer tries to explain through these sentences. An emperor can only control or rule his territory, but he can't go into it. But an artist can understand the mysteries of the universe. That is what she tries to convey here. The painting is gone, but the artist has reached his goal. Even though the painting has disappeared from the wall, it is the accomplishment of the painter. He reached his goal beyond any material appearance. That is what the writer wants to convey here. Come to the next paragraph. A classical Chinese landscape is not meant to reproduce an actual view. This is the major difference between a European painting and a Chinese painting. A Chinese painting or a Chinese landscape is not meant to reproduce the actual view. They don't want to reproduce the actual view, as would a Western figurative painting. Figurative painting here means a metaphorical representation of a piece of art. That is what the European painting does. Whereas the European painter wants you to borrow his eyes and look at a particular landscape exactly as he saw it. This is the major difference. To understand a European painting, we have to borrow the painter's eye, because he drew the picture, drew the landscape with a metaphorical representation of his own. So to understand it, the viewer wants to take his eyes, his perception, his imagination to understand it. Landscape exactly as he saw it, from a specific angle, and that has done through a specific angle. The Chinese painter does not choose a single viewpoint, but when we come to the Chinese painting, the Chinese painter does not choose a single viewpoint. His landscape is not a real one, because his painting is not a real representation of what he had seen. And you can enter it from any point. There is not a single viewpoint for the Chinese painting. From any angle, a viewer can interpret, infer meaning from the Chinese painting. Then travel in it. The artist creates a path for your eyes to travel up and down. There is a lot of chances, opportunities, ways, paths there in Chinese painting, where the viewer can, the onlooker can travel up and down and again come back. This is even more true in the case of the horizontal scroll, in which the action of slowly opening one section of the painting, then rolling it up to move on to the other, adds a dimension of time which is unknown in any of other form of painting. So the Chinese painting, it gives the onlooker a horizontal scroll scroll, a scope for a horizontal scroll, which means the action of slowly opening the section of the painting, then rolling it up to move on to the other. Slowly one can enter the painting and enjoy it from any side, then rolling it up to move on to the other adds a dimension of time which is unknown in any other form of painting. It also requires the active participation of the viewer, and the Chinese painting demands the active participation of the viewer, who decides at what pace he will travel through the painting, and he can decide at what speed, at what pace he can travel through the painting. A participation which is physical as well as mental. So the viewer's complete participation, like physical and mental participation, is essential to enjoy a Chinese painting. The Chinese painter does not want you to borrow his eyes, and a Chinese painter does not want you to borrow his eyes to enjoy the picture. He wants you to enter his mind. The only thing is you have to enter the mind of the painter to understand and to enjoy and to aesthetically interpret the painting. That is what the writer says here. He wants you to enter his mind. This is the major difference. To understand a European painting, we have to borrow the eye of the painter, the European painter, because he created or recreated the painting with his own imagination. We have to borrow his eyes to understand it. But in the Chinese painting, we need not borrow his eyes, but we have to enter the mind of the painter. The landscape is an inner one, a spiritual and a conceptual space. So, a Chinese landscape painting is an inner one. It is a spiritual one, and a conceptual space is there. So, conceptual space here means the relation with the abstract rather than the factual one. That conceptual space is there in the Chinese painting. That we have to understand. There is an inner spirit in Chinese painting. Now let us move on to the next page. This concept is expressed as shan shui. This concept of the abstract is expressed as shan shui, literally mountain water. Look at the shan shui picture here. Literally it means mountain water, which used together represent the word landscape. When we used together these two, shan shui, literally mountain water, mountain and water, these two things, when we used it together, then we get the word landscape. More than two elements of an image, which means more than two elements of an image. These represent two complementary poles. These two elements or two elements of imagination represent two complementary poles, reflecting the Taoist view of the universe. This is the Taoist view of the universe. The combination of two elements. Let us see what are these two elements. The mountain is yang, reaching vertically towards heaven. Shan shui, which literally means mountain water, and it contains two elements. One is mountain, that is yang, which means it reaching vertically towards heaven. It is always stable, warm and dry in the sun, while the water is yin. And when these two combine together, we get the mountain water. Yin, yang and yin. Yin is water. It is always horizontal in shape. One is vertical and the other is horizontal. And resting on the earth. This water is always resting on the earth. It is fluid in nature. It is always moist and cool. These two energies of the universe and its combination is the mystery of the universe, yang and yin. The writer further says that the interaction of yin, the receptive feminine aspect of universal energy. So this is the universal energy, and these two energies, yin and that yang, these two universal energies and its combination, yin, the receptive and the feminine aspect of the universal energy. So this is the feminine aspect of universal energy. It is always to receive. The shape itself is receive or curved, the shape of a lady. It is to receive things. That is the feminine aspect of universal energy, and its counterpart yang, and its counterpart is yang. Yang is always active and masculine. Is of course a fundamental notion of Taoism. These two forms of universal energy. One is the feminine aspect and another is the masculine, male aspect, that is masculine. The yang and yin, and its combination is the fundamental notion of Taoism. What is often overlooked is an essential third element, and for this combination, for the combination of the yin and the yang, it is needed an essential third element, the middle void, and it is called the middle void where their interaction takes place. That middle void is very essential for the interaction of these two universal energies, the masculine and the feminine energies. And this can be compared with the yogic practice of pranayama. Breathe in, retain and breathe out. And Nathalie compares this combination of the feminine and the masculine energy in the universe in the support of the middle void like pranayama. In pranayama, we breathe in and we retain the breath inside our lungs, and during the retained time we meditate and then we breathe out. The suspension of breath is the void where meditation occurs. So when we suspend the breath inside our body, we meditate. So that retained time is the middle void here. The middle void is essential. Nothing can happen without it. So this middle void is the catalytic agent that is very essential here. Nothing can happen without it. Hence the importance of the white unpainted space in Chinese landscape. So when we see a Chinese landscape, we can see this space, this middle void in it. That middle void is the representation of this energy. The combination of the two energy is happened due to this middle void. And this white unpainted space in Chinese landscape is a representation of that middle void. This is also where man finds fundamental role. In another way, the writer says that man or human finds a fundamental role in the universe. In that space between heaven and earth, yes, he is the middle void between heaven and earth. He becomes the conduit of communication. He becomes the conduit. Conduit means a means by which something is transmitted. He becomes the agent of communication between both the poles of universe, that is heaven and earth. His presence is essential even if it is only suggested. Far from being lost or oppressed by the lofty peaks, he is, in Francois Changson's wonderful expression, the eye of the landscape. So man is the eye of the landscape. He acts as the conduit of the communication between the two poles of the universe, like the middle void in a Chinese landscape painting. So this is an excerpt taken from Landscape of the Soul, Ethics and Spirituality in Chinese Painting. It is written by Natale. The second part is Getting Inside Outsider Art, that we will do in a next video. If you did not subscribe my channel, subscribe it and press the bell icon. Then you will get the notifications on time.